The investigation did not begin with a dramatic whistleblower walking into an FBI field office or a detective stumbling across a clue in the dead of night. It started with a single encrypted message sent to an FBI cyber unit in New York. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The email contained no greeting, no signature, and no explanation. Just a sentence, a set of coordinates, and a warning. You're looking in the wrong place. The vault isn't on land. Mallorca, 39.5696 N, 2.6502 E. Before it disappears. First, the message was ignored. The FBI receives dozens of cryptic tips every week, many of them from conspiracy theorists, disgruntled former employees, or anonymous trolls trying to bait agents into chasing ghosts. Under normal circumstances, this one would have been deleted. But it arrived at a moment when the Bureau was deep into a highly sensitive case involving digital extortion, offshore data laundering, and anonymous blackmail operations targeting prominent figures in the United States. That case involved a hidden server in Luxembourg containing illegally obtained recordings from high-profile individuals. The FBI had been tracing the source of those files for months, following a winding trail of IP masking, proxy servers, cryptocurrency payments, and burner devices. Every time investigators got close to identifying a source, the signal vanished and reappeared somewhere else across the globe. The pattern suggested a highly sophisticated operation with significant funding and international reach. The email changed the trajectory of that investigation. A young analyst named Jonathan Pike, who had been combing through digital patterns connected to the Luxembourg server, noticed something odd about the anonymous coordinates in the message. They did not point to a building, a warehouse, a bunker, or anything on land. They pointed to open water off the coast of Spain. There were no oil rigs, no commercial docks, no naval routes, and no known undersea data cables in that exact location. But the date and phrasing of the message unsettled him. Before it disappears. That implied mobility. That implied urgency. And that implied something that could move like a ship or a yacht. Pike brought the message to his supervisor. Most of the team dismissed it, but when cross-checked with recent satellite imagery, an interesting detail emerged. A private yacht matching that general location had been repeatedly appearing and disappearing from AIS tracking systems over the previous 6 months. Ships do not simply vanish from tracking data unless someone wants them to. Maritime law requires most vessels to keep their AIS system on. It is a safety protocol designed to prevent collisions, track shipping routes, and maintain accountability at sea. Yet this particular yacht had gone dark multiple times for extended periods. When it reappeared, it tended to anchor in roughly the same region, just outside the Spanish coastline, never staying long in marinas, never docking publicly, and never announcing arrivals. One of the agents in the room recognized the vessel's name, Ariadne. It had surfaced in gossip columns before, usually tied to celebrity speculation and paparazzi guesses about secret vacations. But mainstream outlets had never confirmed ownership. The yacht was shielded behind layered shell companies registered in at least 3 countries. On paper, it appeared to belong to an investment group. But every time journalists tried to trace its real owners, the trail dead-ended behind legal walls and offshore privacy protections. The yacht had no public story. It was a ghost asset. The FBI flagged the message. Interagency request cables went out. A request for maritime satellite review was filed. And slowly, the pieces began to align. 2 weeks later, a parallel data pattern emerged. Metadata from the Luxembourg server contained a timestamp showing that one of the extortion videos had been uploaded during a window when the Ariadne was known to be at sea. That was the first tangible link between the blackmail case and the yacht. For the first time, investigators had a physical target. But they still didn't know who was behind it. The breakthrough came when a second anonymous tip landed. This time, through an intermediary in London. A former staff member from the yacht had quietly approached a solicitor, terrified and desperate for legal protection. The solicitor, alarmed by what the employee described, contacted UK authorities, and the information eventually reached US investigators through liaison channels. The whistleblower claimed there were hard drives on board the yacht containing damaging recordings of high-profile individuals, including members of the British royal family, influential politicians, and international power brokers. Some recordings, the whistleblower insisted, were made without consent. Others were collected under the guise of documentation, but were later repurposed for leverage. The whistleblower did not claim Meghan Markle operated the system, but confirmed she spent significant time on the vessel, hosted private strategy meetings aboard it, and was aware that the yacht was a controlled communication space. The solicitor's memo included 4 chilling words. She calls it insurance. That phrase landed like an electric shock. In intelligence circles, insurance is a loaded term. Dictators, cartel bosses, intelligence operatives, and media tycoons have used that same word to describe files or evidence they keep as protection, material designed to prevent betrayal or ensure survival if alliances collapse. Insurance is only necessary when someone anticipates a threat. For Meghan, the whistleblower said, the threat was not one person. It was a system, the monarchy, the British press, the establishment, the institutions she believed had tried to destroy her reputation. The staffer claimed the yacht was not a playground. It was a vault, a floating bunker of secrets. That is when the FBI changed its posture from curiosity to action. Subpoenas were prepared. Intelligence requests went out to European partners. Spanish authorities were notified privately. The Bureau built a timeline of the yacht's movements. Satellite logs confirmed irregular navigation patterns. It would remain anchored offshore for days, then vanish again, always returning to roughly the same region, never crossing into waters where jurisdictions became simpler and dockside inspections were routine. It behaved like a vessel that did not want visitors. The question inside agency offices shifted. It was no longer who owns the yacht. The question became, why is someone taking such extreme measures to prevent anyone from knowing what is happening on it? The whistleblower provided one final piece of information that forced the FBI's hand. They claimed the yacht's tech room had recently upgraded its equipment and that someone on board had begun destroying select files. Not all of them, only some. The timing mattered. The deletion reportedly began shortly after a major British newspaper published a new wave of negative coverage about Meghan, reigniting public criticism of her and Harry's post-royal dealings. According to the whistleblower, Meghan believed there were forces preparing to leak damaging information about her, and she wanted countermeasures ready. The deletions suggested someone feared exposure. Before investigators could react, the Ariadne disappeared from AIS tracking once again. But this time, the FBI was watching. They pulled satellite sweeps. They marked wake patterns on ocean current analysis. They intercepted communications from support vessels believed to be tied to the yacht's operations. When the Ariadne resurfaced days later, anchoring in nearly the exact coordinates from the original anonymous email, the Bureau made their move. The tip, it turned out, had been accurate down to the decimal. But the FBI still needed legal grounds to board a foreign vessel in international waters. So they dug deeper into financial records connected to the yacht and found their opening. A possible connection to digital extortion channels that fell under U.S. jurisdiction, giving them a legal path forward. Judges were briefed. Warrants were signed. Cooperation documents with Spain were executed. And a covert task unit was assembled to seize the vessel's data infrastructure, not its occupants. The objective was simple. Secure the vault, secure the hardware, secure whatever evidence tied the yacht to the Luxembourg server. There was no plan to arrest Meghan, interrogate her, or create a political spectacle. The FBI did not want headlines. They wanted proof. Meanwhile, in London, there were quiet tremors. Rumors of an impending data scandal reached a handful of insiders in political and media circles. A senior figure inside a major British institution, unnamed, but closely connected to the monarchy, allegedly warned colleagues that a severe digital threat to the royal family was looming. That warning never made it to the public, but it fueled internal panic, message purges, and emergency legal consultations. Back in New York, the anonymous whistleblower was now under protection. Their testimony confirmed what investigators already suspected. The Ariadne was not merely a yacht. It was a fortress of curated scandals. And at the center of that storm, willingly or unwillingly, was Meghan Markle. With the evidence mounting, the Bureau initiated the operation that would lead them to the steel hull off Majorca, the sealed hard drives, the hidden compartments, and the footage that would ignite a global firestorm. The tip had been right. The vault was not on land. And what waited inside would soon ripple through governments, palace walls, and every household that had followed the rise, fall, and reinvention of the most controversial couple of the modern royal era. The agents were already in position by the time the sun cracked the horizon over the Balearic Sea. At 5:42 a.m. local time, 2 Zodiac boats launched from a larger vessel stationed 6 nautical miles offshore. The FBI team on board had arrived during the night under the guise of maritime research. Their approach to the Ariadne was silent, tactical, and deliberate. There were no flashing lights, no uniforms, and no warnings. The men wore civilian clothes, their identification sealed in weatherproof packs until the moment they would be needed. Every second of the approach had been rehearsed. Every possibility gamed out. What if the crew resisted? What if hard drives were dumped overboard? What if the occupants fled by helicopter? The Ariadne had multiple decks, a helipad, reinforced hull plating, and advanced internal security measures. This was not a party yacht. It was designed to be impenetrable by casual visitors and invisible to most authorities. The operation's codename was Scarlet Vault. It had been authorized 48 hours earlier by high-level DOJ clearance after months of digital surveillance, satellite tracking, and interagency coordination. Spanish officials were looped in at the 11th hour. They agreed to stand down and allow the U.S. team to proceed under special terms. Spain had no interest in becoming the center of another international scandal involving British royalty and American legal overreach. At 5:56 a.m., the 2 FBI teams boarded the yacht from the starboard and stern access points simultaneously. There were no guards, no alarms, only a steward, caught mid-coffee prep in the galley, who froze as soon as he saw the weapons holstered under the agents' jackets. The lead agent showed his identification, along with the warrant translated into Spanish and English. There was no shouting, no drawn weapons, only firm, clear commands and swift movement. Within 4 minutes, the crew had been gathered in the main salon. Phones were collected. A translator, prepped in advance, briefed the staff on what was happening. No one protested, but everyone looked scared. One of the staff members, a security technician, tried to leave the room. He was stopped, restrained, and isolated for separate questioning. When agents later checked his backpack, they found 2 USB drives and a bag of shredded papers that had yet to be disposed of. That's when the urgency escalated. Agents moved fast. The goal was not to arrest, not to question, not to confiscate phones or clothes or toiletries. The operation's objective was narrow but critical. Secure any data storage devices, any surveillance logs, and any recording systems believed to be related to the Luxembourg case. They weren't looking for headlines. They were looking for evidence. They began in the communications hub, an unmarked door on the lower deck that looked, from the outside, like a linen closet. Inside was a different story. The room was lined with temperature-regulated racks, RAID storage systems, and high-grade firewall equipment. There were 2 servers, several encrypted laptops, a biometric access cabinet, and a thermal bag containing multiple hard drives labeled with 3-letter codes. One of the hard drives had already been removed from its mount. It was halfway inside a shockproof case when agents found it. They bagged it immediately, tagging it as Priority Alpha. Above deck, another agent found a concealed drawer in the master suite containing 5 SD cards, each inside static-proof envelopes. 2 were labeled with dates. The others had names redacted by black tape. Another agent found a journal with handwritten notations, some referencing timestamps, keywords, and what looked like metadata logs. The team moved methodically through every compartment. A secret panel behind a mirror led to a wall cavity where 4 old-model phones were stored. None of them had SIM cards. All of them had been wiped, but only recently. One had a log entry dated 72 hours before the raid. The deletion was incomplete. When agents scanned the device, a partial thumbnail appeared. It showed a man in royal military dress. Mid-conversation. Mid-sentence. At 6:14 a.m., The lead agent was informed they had found something unexpected: an offline workstation connected to a multi-channel audio array. It had been recording continuously, storing backups to a private network drive. The room, disguised as a reading nook, was actually an isolated surveillance hub. It had directional mics, room mapping sensors, and a console designed to monitor onboard activity. It wasn't just logging meetings. It was eavesdropping. The evidence was growing heavier by the minute. They found a high-end video editing rig with proprietary software linked to a secure editing environment. A log of recent projects included video files labeled with vague references like HM-ARGMAS1, VIPONVX, and Staff Meltdown T3. One file was actively rendering as the team entered the room. It contained footage from the yacht's dining area. The audio was clear, the faces unmistakable. 2 voices, one American, one British, arguing over loyalty, over family, over optics. The British voice accused the other of weaponizing trauma for leverage. The American voice fired back: "Your silence was violence. You let them bury me." Then silence. Then a whisper: "This is the last time I beg." The agents paused, then copied the footage to a clean drive, bagged the computer, and moved on. As the team swept the upper levels, they noticed something odd. Most surveillance devices were installed at eye level or slightly above, but a few were hidden in areas that would only capture people in moments of vulnerability: reclining, resting, alone. One device was hidden inside a ceiling vent facing downward toward the main suite's bed. Another was mounted in a lamp near the writing desk. These weren't security measures. These were tools of documentation, deliberate, quiet, and persistent. At 6:43 a.m., the raid was complete. The team had secured 17 electronic devices, 9 encrypted storage units for SD cards, 3 paper notebooks, and dozens of digital logs tied to internal yacht activity. A secondary team began a forensic scan to confirm no active deletion scripts were running. A final sweep of the comms room confirmed all drives were cloned and bagged. The agents prepared for exfiltration. But just as they were about to leave, a junior agent flagged something strange. Hidden behind a locked cabinet in the entertainment lounge was a custom sound system with an access panel wired into the yacht's internal communication array. The panel had a backup power supply. Inside was a miniature device no larger than a deck of cards. It was transmitting. They pulled it. The device had a frequency masking system. It was relaying data, not over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but through a narrow-range UHF channel. When connected to a forensic scanner, the destination registered as a dead server in Switzerland. The device had last pinged it 9 days prior. The theory? Someone was remotely backing up data from the yacht, silently, without triggering alarms. This changed everything. The FBI now had to assume that whatever evidence they recovered might only be part of a larger archive. If someone had access to this data offsite, they could release it at any time. The agents reported it immediately. The threat model expanded. At 7:05 a.m., the FBI left the Ariadne. The evidence was airlifted by helicopter to a secured facility operated in coordination with European law enforcement. No arrests were made. No formal statements issued. By the time most of Europe woke up, the operation was over. The news didn't break for 72 hours. When it did, it came not through the FBI or an official press release, but through a leak to an investigative journalist in Berlin. The headline was blunt: FBI seizes devices from yacht linked to high-profile extortion case. No names were mentioned, no footage released, but speculation exploded. Journalists began cross-referencing yacht sightings with guest appearances. Footage from drones and paparazzi over the past year was dissected. Forums and message boards lit up. Royal watchers dug through flight records, trying to piece together who might have visited the yacht. A familiar name appeared again and again: Meghan. She had not been on board during the raid. Her location at the time was unknown. Some reports suggested she was in California. Others placed her in France. Her representatives declined to comment. But the silence said more than any press statement ever could. Inside the evidence room in Germany, agents began decrypting drives. Each unlocked folder led to more questions. Why were these recordings made? Who edited them? What were they intended for? And perhaps the most important question of all, who else had a copy? Inside the evidence vault near Frankfurt, Germany, the first hard drive was slotted into the decryption chamber. It was sealed with 256-bit encryption, multi-layered, wrapped in a custom script that tried to reroute the decoding path through false partitions and dead-end folders. Whoever set it up wasn't just hiding data, they were burying it 3 levels deep. But the FBI's tech unit had already seen fragments from its clone drive recovered aboard the Ariadne. They knew where to dig. 6 hours later, the folders began to open. They were organized by date. No names. Just strings of numbers and letters. Some readable, some clearly ciphered. At first glance, the contents seemed mundane. Video files, audio logs, sensor reports, and access logs. But it wasn't the volume of data that caught the eye. Most security footage is static. Cameras are mounted for visibility, for deterrence. You expect corners of rooms, overhead views, entrances, exits. But what the team found here were shots composed with intention, like someone had placed cameras to capture full conversations, full expressions, full context. These weren't just security recordings. These were productions. The first file the team examined was labeled S 2021-09-14 CB1. It opened on a dimly lit lounge space. The yacht's interior was sleek and modern, all soft edges and designer finishes. The camera appeared to be hidden inside a decorative wall sconce. The view was steady, centered, and strangely intimate. A woman, partially visible, paced across the frame. Her voice came in clearly. She was discussing media strategy, how to frame a recent press release, how to coordinate response timing between 3 different platforms. But it was the final sentence that made the agents freeze. They'll never know this came from us. It'll look like organic backlash. The video cut. The next file was longer. It opened with a timestamp and a digital watermark in the bottom right corner. This camera had been placed inside what looked like the yacht's small conference room. A long table, dim overhead lighting, and 3 people seated close together, 2 women, 1 man. Their faces were obscured by angles and lighting, but the conversation was crystal clear. They were discussing a figure referred to only as the older one, and how to manage his potential reaction to an unspecified announcement. If he speaks, one of the women said, "We release the clip." The man nodded. He won't, but have it queued, just in case. What clip? One of the analysts watching the footage asked out loud. It was the beginning of a much larger picture forming. Each of the hidden cameras retrieved from the Ariadne was wired into a private internal system. The devices were not transmitting live. They were storing locally, buffering to encrypted drives that could only be accessed through biometric or code-locked control terminals. The level of sophistication ruled out amateur surveillance. This was closer to corporate espionage than anything resembling standard yacht security. Worse still, none of the cameras were visible to the naked eye. The FBI's physical sweep had only uncovered them because of blueprints provided by the whistleblower. Some were embedded inside vent grills. Others disguised as standard motion detectors. One was housed behind a 2-way mirror. Another was integrated into a faux smoke detector in the main bedroom. All ran on isolated battery systems. All fed to a central core buried in the yacht's secondary server rack. Over a dozen cameras. Over 200 hours of footage. None labeled. None disclosed to the yacht staff. This wasn't a system meant for safety. It was meant for observation. The analysts cataloged the recovered files based on location. Bridge, master suite, conference room, lounge, spa deck, and private study. Each location had recurring guests, familiar voices, and disturbing continuity. Certain individuals appeared more often than others, Meghan Markle included. Her presence in the footage was frequent but not always central. At times she was simply in the background. At other times she led the conversation. But she never acknowledged the presence of cameras. Not once. And then came the folder marked P. Its contents were different. They weren't wide-angle surveillance videos. They were tight, deliberate clips, cropped, edited, some with titles. The thumbnails were sharper. The framing was cinematic. The audio was compressed for clarity. These files had been touched, reviewed, possibly prepared for release or at least internal sharing. One clip, timestamped late 2022, showed a private dinner. The guests were dressed down, the lighting intimate. The conversation turned sharply when one attendee began discussing internal palace correspondence. Letters, messages, reactions to a public statement Meghan had made the week before. Another guest warned, "Careful." He said, "They're monitoring you again." The clip ended mid-sentence. The final image, Meghan lowering her eyes and saying, "Let them. I have backup." The word backup, in context, now carried an entirely different weight. Another video was less composed. It opened mid-argument. Two men off camera. One voice, recognizable as Prince Harry, was raised, strained. The other, deeper, harder to identify, accused him of breaking every unwritten rule of family. The response came sharp. "There are no rules left. You broke them when you let them attack her." The room was silent after that. The camera panned slightly, mechanically, not manually, and caught Harry sitting alone for several minutes, hands on his head. The footage wasn't just shocking. It was deeply human, but it also raised serious questions. Why was it recorded? Who was the audience? Was this documentation or manipulation? The deeper the analysts dug, the more consistent the pattern became. High-stress conversations, intimate disclosures, strategy discussions, all recorded from angles that implied participants had no idea they were being watched. In one clip, two staff members of the yacht were caught whispering in a side corridor about their discomfort with how guests were being treated. "She's different when there's no cameras," one said. "You think she has them off, but I swear someone's always watching." That statement now felt less like paranoia and more like reluctant truth. And yet, for all the data the FBI had retrieved, there were still missing pieces. Gaps in sequences. Missing days. Several folders had been deliberately corrupted. Others had timestamps without playable files. Forensic analysts believed some of the data had been wiped shortly before the raid. Possibly remotely, possibly by someone on the inside. That was when they found the backup directory. It was hidden behind a logic gate loop in the server architecture, only accessible by cycling through a specific file order, a kind of digital breadcrumb trail. Once unlocked, it revealed a secondary database titled escrow. The name alone triggered alarms. In intelligence terms, escrow usually refers to information held in reserve, files or data kept as leverage, insurance, or timed release materials. This folder was small, only 16 files, but its contents were chilling. One was a draft email addressed to an unnamed media outlet, with an attachment labeled proof_A. Another was a voice note, heavily redacted, but with one chilling sentence left intact. "This footage will break their silence, one way or another." Among the more disturbing discoveries was a private memo, formatted like a mission brief. It listed 5 names, 3 regions, and a series of projected release scenarios for reputation redirection. Each name was assigned a likelihood score and a shock tolerance metric. The analysts couldn't determine who authored it, but the language was cold, strategic, and deeply calculated. The cameras weren't simply recording history. They were collecting weapons. By the time the FBI finished processing the first server, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about illegal surveillance or undisclosed recordings. It was about intent, about the architecture of a system designed not just to record, but to hold, evaluate, and, when necessary, release. One former intelligence consultant called it the most sophisticated non-state black vault they had ever seen. Another likened it to a hybrid between a political opposition dossier and an emotional hostage situation. There was no smoking gun implicating Meghan directly in the deployment of the cameras. Not yet. But her presence, her voice, and her engagement in conversations that should have been private raised immediate ethical and legal flags. The footage was handed over to 2 separate legal teams, one focused on cybercrimes, the other on human rights violations. The use of hidden surveillance on unsuspecting individuals, even aboard a private vessel, carried serious legal risk, particularly when those individuals were from foreign nations, and especially if any minors appeared in the footage. The British government requested a briefing. It was denied. The royal family issued no comment, but insiders confirmed security around senior members was increased. Internal staff were asked to review all past communications for signs of compromise. Devices were scanned. Rooms checked for bugs. Several advisors suggested shifting all internal planning to secure, in-person meetings only. In other words, the monarchy had gone into quiet lockdown. Meanwhile, the internet caught wind of a rumor that hidden cameras had been found. Theories bloomed like wildflowers in fire season. Some believed it was part of a global plot. Others said it proved what they'd always suspected, that Meghan and Harry were building a case not for privacy, but for power. The truth was more complex and far more dangerous. Because as the FBI's analysts reviewed the final folder from the Ariadne's central system, they found a file that was different from the rest. It wasn't video. It wasn't audio. It was a document. Simple, plain text. One sentence. If this ever sees daylight, I am not the villain. And beneath that, in smaller font, a signature. One that the FBI redacted before submitting it to the official case log. Whatever the public thought it knew about Meghan Markle's exit from the royal family, that sentence suggested a narrative far deeper and far more prepared than anyone had imagined. The video was time-stamped March 17, 2022. The file name, stripped of metadata, had been labeled Family Meet C2. It had been buried inside one of the encrypted partitions recovered from the Ariadne's core server. There was no context, no description, no indication of what was about to unfold. The frame opened on what appeared to be the yacht's private study. The room was clean, minimalist, with 2 armchairs, a table, and large windows overlooking the sea. The lighting was soft, natural, the kind of environment curated for comfort, not confrontation. And yet, the moment captured in that frame was anything but calm. Prince Harry was pacing. He looked thinner than usual, face drawn, eyes locked on the floor. Across from him sat a woman, her back to the camera, but unmistakably Meghan. Her posture was straight, composed, waiting. He spoke first. They want a statement. They want me to distance myself from you. There was a pause. Meghan didn't answer right away. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if the information wasn't new. And, she finally said, they said if I don't, I'll be cut off completely. No protection, no funding, no contact. Another pause. This one longer. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then let them, Meghan said. Harry turned. His voice rose, not in anger, but in desperation. This isn't just about money, Meg. It's everything. My brother said I'm burning the bridge. That there's no coming back from this. Her response was immediate. It already burned. You just didn't want to watch. The clip ended abruptly. But it wasn't the only one. The folder marked C2 contained nearly 24 videos, all centered around conversations between Harry and either Meghan, staff members, or, in some cases, voices only heard through phone calls or voice messages. They captured the slow, painful unraveling of a man caught between 2 worlds. The footage was raw, emotional, far from the polished, scripted versions of Harry seen in interviews or press appearances. The term erased came up more than once in these recordings. Several staff members described what happened when someone made a mistake. They weren't fired outright. They were rotated out, sent back to shore, never called again, access to shared folders revoked, their names struck from rosters, no reference letters, no explanation, just silence. One steward referred to it as the airlock treatment. Another voice memo captured late at night revealed the anxiety of a wellness staffer who had discovered what she believed was a recording device inside the flower arrangement in the spa room. "I moved the vase to clean underneath it," she whispered. "It was wired. Wires. In a vase. Why? Are we being watched? Are they recording our conversations during sessions? Does Meghan even know? Or is someone else running this behind her back?" But the most damning discovery wasn't a voice memo or a hidden camera clip. It was a folder on a confiscated laptop titled Staff Behavior Log. Inside were detailed notes, time-stamped, color-coded, documenting staff actions, attitudes, and performance over several months. The entries read like military dossiers. Steward number 4 displayed resistance to revised room service protocol. Re-educate or remove. Chef exhibited emotional fatigue. Offered additional wellness session but noted signs of instability. Watch closely. Security contractor attempted to discuss personal matters with guest. Breach of proximity boundaries. Consider replacement. There were over 300 entries. Each one cataloged a human being as a potential variable. Each one judged not on skill, but on loyalty, discretion, and mood. It wasn't illegal, but it was dystopian. Staff were not simply expected to serve. They were expected to perform, to project calm, to absorb the emotional burden of their employers without flinching. And they were watched. Constantly. The FBI interviewed the whistleblower, the former crew member who had first tipped them off. In a sealed statement, they described the Ariadne as a floating fortress of control. Every part of it was about the brand, the image, the narrative. But when the cameras weren't rolling, when the guests weren't on board, the energy changed. Meghan was strategic, sharp, always aware of optics. And Harry, he looked lost most of the time. Sad. Like he was trying to convince himself he'd made the right choice. The whistleblower went on to describe a culture of burnout, where the average crew member lasted less than 3 months before requesting reassignment or disappearing altogether. There was no room for mistakes. No room for individuality. You were either useful or invisible. When asked why they stayed as long as they did, the whistleblower said one thing. Fear. We were all afraid, not of her exactly, but of what would happen if we spoke out. NDAs, lawsuits, being blacklisted. One guy who worked security said he got a visit from someone after he quit. Not a threat, just a reminder. You signed something. And then they asked for his phone. There was one more piece of evidence that stunned investigators. A set of internal documents marked private staff scripts. They appeared to be conversation guides, dialogues pre-written for crew to use when interacting with guests or media personnel. Phrases like, "Meghan is incredibly thoughtful. It's a privilege to serve someone who values her team so highly. I've worked on yachts for years. And this is by far the most empowering environment I've been in. This level of attention to detail comes from love, not control. Scripted, rehearsed, coached, not spontaneous. This, more than anything else, confirmed what many suspected. The Ariadne wasn't just a luxury vessel. It was a set, production, a carefully staged theater where every player, no matter how small, was expected to hit their marks. When the FBI compiled its findings for internal review, the section on crew conditions filled over 200 pages. While there were no explicit crimes discovered in the behavior logs or staff breakdowns, the cumulative pattern painted a chilling portrait of life inside the yacht's walls. There were emotional breakdowns, documented panic attacks, recorded pleas for reassignment. Several staff members, once contacted anonymously by investigators, declined to go on record, but confirmed the environment was high pressure, unrelenting, and emotionally corrosive. One, a former deckhand, summed it up best. It was like serving royalty, but not the kind you respect. The kind you fear. He paused. They talk about escaping the system, but they built their own. And it's worse. As this information began circulating behind closed doors, legal experts debated the implications. Non-disclosure agreements, while legally binding, cannot protect against workplace abuse or emotional manipulation. But without formal complaints, and with most staff too afraid to come forward, there was no case. Just stories, fragments, pain. Back in the evidence vault, the reviewing team added one more entry to the timeline. An unmarked voice recording, found buried in a temporary cache. A woman crying softly, whispering to herself, "They keep saying I'm lucky, that people would kill for this job. But all I want is to go home." And then, in a barely audible voice, "I just want to feel real again." The recording ended. And so did the illusion. End of chapter 5. Approximate 2050 words. Say go when you're ready for chapter 6. Shadow meetings with influencers and politicians. You said, go. Right for me said, here is chapter 6. Shadow meetings with influencers and politicians, written in a fully fleshed out narrative style to meet and exceed the 1,800 word minimum, maintaining continuity with previous chapters. Once completed, I'll wait for your signal before continuing to chapter 7. Chapter 6. Shadow meetings with influencers and politicians. On the outside, the Ariadne looked like any other luxury superyacht. From the drone shots captured by paparazzi over the last 2 years, it was just another floating palace with white decks, glossy windows, and sun-kissed leisure. But the real activity never happened on the upper levels, in view of the cameras or under the sun. It happened below deck, after midnight, in the guest quarters no media outlet knew to ask about, in meeting rooms with the windows blacked out. According to the files recovered by the FBI, over a dozen high-profile figures visited the Ariadne in secrecy between mid-2021 and early 2023. Most of them did not appear on manifest records. Their arrivals were coordinated via encrypted messaging platforms, their identities shielded under aliases. Even the yacht staff often weren't told who was coming until hours before, and sometimes not at all. Code words were used in staff briefings: Swan, Orchid, Helix. Each one corresponded to an arrival protocol. And while many came with the appearance of friendship, what took place on board resembled strategy more than socializing. In a folder named Comms Visitors Restricted, investigators found a spreadsheet. No dates, no full names, just initials, titles, and conversation summaries. Among the entries were MPUK, Offshore Legal Protections, RHCA Narrative Contingency Mapping, and MJPR Influencer Growth Network, cross-platform. Each row was marked with a confidentiality level and a checkbox indicating whether the meeting had been recorded, summarized, or redirected. One row simply read, Confidential Head of Platform Strategy, Undisclosed. Discussed shadow moderation. Analysts cross-referenced this data with known travel patterns, leaked documents from private jet flight logs, and regional marina activity. The matches weren't definitive, but they were suggestive. A well-known political advisor had been photographed in Mallorca 3 days after one of the hidden meetings was logged. A high-earning lifestyle influencer posted a throwback photo from a private wellness retreat in Ibiza, taken just miles from where the Ariadne had been anchored at the same time. But the clearest evidence wasn't in logs or photos. It was in the footage. One video clip, titled StratSync Orchid 2, showed Meghan seated at a round table with 2 individuals whose faces were partially obscured. The conversation began politely, discussing online harassment, coordinated media attacks, and the struggle to reclaim narratives. But it quickly shifted into something else. A pitch. Look, one of the visitors said, if you want to change perception, you have to stop responding to stories. You need to create them. Frame the conversation before they do. Meghan listened, arms crossed. She asked pointed questions about virality metrics, emotional framing, and platform psychology. It's not just about pushing back, the man said. It's about being first. When you're first, you get to define what the truth is. Everything after that is just commentary. Another video, less formal but no less calculated, showed a dinner meeting on the upper deck. The table was filled with champagne, oysters, imported wines. Guests laughed. Candles flickered. But the conversation, caught by a microphone hidden behind a planter, veered into distinctly strategic territory. "You have an army of voices ready to go," a woman said. "All you have to do is give them the signal." Meghan replied quietly. "Not yet." The woman pressed. "When then?" "When it hurts them more than it costs me," Meghan answered. The line became a tagline among FBI reviewers. Cold, smart, and indicative of a mindset that had long moved past defense. This wasn't someone playing catch-up. This was someone with a game plan. The meetings weren't just about media. Several clips involved political discussions. One video, labeled Red Leaf _pitch, featured two guests discussing global charity partnerships. On the surface, the dialogue was about aid coordination and NGO strategy. But then one guest brought up influence. If you get the right visibility partners, activists, celebrities, even former diplomats, it's not just charity. It's infrastructure. It's policy by proxy. Meghan leaned in. "Would it make them nervous?" she asked. "Yes," the guest said. "Because you're not in office, but you'd still have reach." Another meeting focused on speech strategy. A guest, likely a former consultant based on his speaking rhythm, walked Meghan through a draft for a potential keynote address. They argued over tone, over framing, over which story to lead with. "If you start with victimhood, they'll tune out," he said. "Start with control. Show them you understand power. Then tell them how you had it taken away." Meghan pushed back. "That makes me sound like I was blind." "I wasn't." He shrugged. "Then make it sound like you were gracious. People like grace." It wasn't a hostile conversation. It was practiced, like rehearsals for a show that hadn't yet begun. And yet, amid all this footage, not a single official record of these meetings existed. No guest books, no releases, no confirmations, just shadows and footage. The FBI grew especially concerned when they reviewed files that included discussion of algorithms, reach manipulation, and artificial amplification. One guest, an unnamed tech specialist, presented a theory of cascade sentiment seeding. The idea: plant emotional talking points across multiple influencer tiers, then activate them in a timed sequence to simulate grassroots emotion. "It's not fake news," the specialist said. "It's emotional choreography. If you can move 5 influencers, you can move 5 million people." Another clip, timestamped in early 2022, caught a conversation between Meghan and two women about the backlash surrounding her public appearances. "They hate that I have a voice," she said. One woman responded, "They hate that you're using it outside their system. You're off script." Meghan, "Good. That means it's working." It became clear to investigators that the Ariadne functioned as more than a place of escape. It was a floating war room. Media strategy, perception warfare, influence design, it all happened aboard a yacht registered under a shell company with zero accountability. The motive? That was still being debated. Some agents believed this was about control. Meghan had been cast as a villain too many times and was reclaiming her narrative. Others saw it as a power move, an attempt to build an influence empire outside traditional institutions, using celebrity as leverage. A few worried it pointed to something darker. A long-term campaign to undermine the very structures Meghan and Harry had once claimed to simply be escaping. What remained most disturbing, however, was the complete absence of oversight. If a public figure meets with political operatives on land, there are walls, media scrutiny, disclosures, leaks. But on a yacht in international waters, there are no rules, no reporters, no accountability. And yet, one thread ran through all the meetings, spoken aloud or implied in the subtext: preparation. Every meeting, every guest, every conversation centered around preparing for something. A moment, a revelation, a counterattack. One video, pulled from a folder labeled Phoenix Protocol, showed Meghan and a single guest sitting in near darkness. The guest spoke slowly, almost methodically. "It's not just reputation. It's narrative control in case they decide to go nuclear. What's nuclear to them? Meghan asked. The answer was fast. Your truth. In your voice. In your tone. With your receipts. She didn't respond. The guest continued. You can frame it however you want. A leak. A vault breach. An anonymous drop. But the point is, they know you have it. Meghan finally looked up. They should. Back at the FBI's review center, that clip was played 5 times. Transcribed. Annotated. Filed under the highest threat protocol classification. Because it no longer looked like someone trying to preserve their name. It looked like someone preparing for war. For months, investigators focused on footage. Recordings. Conversations. Strategy. But it wasn't until the forensic accounting team got involved that the real foundation of the operation came into view. Not the emotional groundwork, not the public narrative, but the machinery behind it all. The money. Because no operation, no matter how sophisticated, is truly invisible if someone is getting paid. From the beginning, the Ariadne had raised red flags. Luxury yachts of its class typically required upwards of $8 to $12 million a year in operating costs alone. Fuel, staff, maintenance, security, food, mooring fees, satellite communications, permits, repairs, legal retainers. That's before factoring in upgrades like advanced surveillance systems, encrypted communications hubs, or the logistics of flying in undisclosed guests under layers of alias management. And yet, the Ariadne never appeared on any of Meghan Markle or Prince Harry's known financial disclosures. Not through Archwell. Not through their production deals. Not through their trust. The yacht was registered under a company called Helios Maritime Holdings, based in the Cayman Islands, with parent entities linking through a labyrinth of offshore firms in Guernsey, Malta, and, curiously, Delaware. At first glance, Helios looked like a standard tax shelter. Opaque, boring, unremarkable. Until the FBI traced the first wire transfer. A payment of $2.3 million, made 9 months after Meghan and Harry's infamous Oprah interview, deposited into a Helios subaccount from a shadow fund in Dubai. The payment was marked as a consulting retainer and split across multiple vendors. None of those vendors had physical offices. 2 were linked to shell companies.